We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. It is the 23rd of November, 2019, and it's good to have you with us once again, as there's no shortage of events to talk about in our ever-eventful world. Good morning, Vicky.
Good morning. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be an action-packed broadcast, as it always seems to be. One of the things that we had starting out here, and there's just breaking news from yesterday that I just learned of, which we're going to get into more in depth a little bit later on, but we just had a Chinese spy that was convicted here in the United States. This was something he was arrested for last year, and apparently this has been pretty devastating to our ability to collect intelligence from China on the ground. So we'll, in fact, even the officials don't fully understand the degree to which what was actually lost, the damage was done. So, as I said, we'll get into that a little bit more in depth as time progresses here. But we had just a few things off the top, since they're not going to be relevant next week. We had the 5th Democratic debate that took place, Vicky.
Oh, did we? Gee, yes. I missed it.
Yeah. Well, I think probably a lot of people missed it because it wasn't really that interesting from all accounts. But and though I disagree with her, the highlight of this whole thing is Tulsi Gabbard. It's interesting to watch her. She's the only one really that seems to have any sanity. And to be quite honest about it, I mean, I disagree with her on policy issues, many policy issues. Especially,
but you admire her sanity?
I admire her sanity. I admire anybody that seems to have sanity. Because they're so, sanity is one of those things that's so rare these days, especially in the Democratic Party. They got all these crazy ideas, and I mean, they are crazy. There are crazy ideas. The gender ideas about how men can compete in women's sports. Yes, I said men.
That's insane.
I said men. Because they are men. They're biologically men. And they're competing in women's sports, and they're taking all the trophies. Well, gee, imagine that. Women can't compete.
What is it they say about lipstick on a pig? He's a man. You can't put lipstick on him and call him a woman. He's still a man.
My whole life I've been dressing up like a man.
That's exactly how they are. And then they want to dress like a woman and compete in women's sports. And this is something that we're supposed to accept as being sane. And Vicky, if you don't accept it, why, you're just you must be a racist, you must be a homophobe, you must be a transgender phobe, you must be all of these names. You look up every dictionary definition of everything that's wrong, and your picture is there.
Yep. Well, and you know what? I don't give a damn. They can call me anything that I want.
Yeah, me either.
Anything that they want. if the man was born a biological man, he is biologically different than women, and it doesn't matter how he dresses up, and I don't care who doesn't like it if I say that.
Well, I wonder how many of these people are biologically insane. That's the problem that we have. But see, getting back to the debate, the thing that I like is Tulsi Gabbard, at least on foreign policy. She has it nailed, and she's fun to watch because she keeps them all off guard, scrambling for cover, and she goes on attack. As I said, she's only seen one of the bunch. Here's a highlight where she wiped the floor with Pete Buttigieg.
But I want to get back to Pete Buttigieg and his comment about experience. Pete, you'll agree that the service that we both have provided to our country as veterans by itself does not qualify us to serve as commander-in-chief. I think the most recent example of your inexperience in national security and foreign policy came from your recent careless statement about how you as president would be willing to send our troops to Mexico to fight the cartels. As commander-in-chief, leader of our armed forces, I bring extensive experience serving for 7 years in Congress, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, on the Armed Services Committee, on the Homeland Security Committee, meeting with leaders of countries around the world, working with military commanders of different commands, dealing with high-level national security briefings, understanding what's necessary, the preparation that I've gotten to walk in on day one to serve as Commander-in-Chief.
Congresswoman, thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'll allow you to respond.
I know that it's par for the course in Washington to take remarks out of context, but that is outlandish even by the standards of today's politics.
Are you saying that you didn't say that?
I was talking about U.S.-Mexico cooperation. We've been doing security cooperation with Mexico for years, with law enforcement cooperation and a military relationship that could continue to be developed with training relationships, for example. Do you seriously think anybody on this stage is proposing invading Mexico?
That's not what I said.
I'm talking about building up alliances. And if your question is about experience, let's also talk about judgment. One of the foreign leaders you mentioned meeting was Bashar al-Assad. I have, in my experience, such as it is, whether you think it counts or not, since it wasn't accumulated in Washington, enough judgment that I would not have sat down with a murderous dictator like that.
Congresswoman Gabbard, let me allow you to respond.
Thank you. You were asked directly whether you would send our troops to Mexico to fight cartels, and your answer was yes. The fact checkers can check this out. No. But your point about judgment is absolutely correct. Our commander-in-chief does need to have good judgment. And what you've just pointed out is that you would lack the courage to meet with both adversaries and friends to ensure the peace and national security of our nation. I take the example of those leaders who have come before us, leaders like JFK, who met with Khrushchev, like Roosevelt, who met with Stalin,
like Donald Trump,
Reagan, who met and worked with Gorbachev. These issues of national security are incredibly important. I will meet with and do what is necessary to make sure that no more of our brothers and sisters in uniform are needlessly sent into harm's way fighting regime change wars that undermine our national security.
She has taken a lot of heat over this meeting with Bashar al-Assad. I don't know what these people are thinking, because you can't hope to ever solve any problem on the world stage if you don't meet with your enemies.
Well, but what they were talking about is the drug cartels.
Yes.
I mean, I got to go with Buttigieg or whatever the heck his name is on that one. You can't meet with terrorists and criminals and try to come up with
Bashar al-Assad isn't a terrorist.
No, Assad is not a terrorist. Yeah. But what we're talking about in Mexico with the drug cartels, they are criminals.
Yeah, well, you got a point there, and I mean, I agree with you on that. We've been saying here that they should put the military on the border to police the border for the longest time. I don't know that we need to send them down to Mexico, into Mexico. I don't know. I mean, the thing is that I think as long as we had the military on the border, enforcing the border. I mean, that's what the military is supposed to be doing, is protecting, defending. It's a defense force. It's being used around the world as an offense force.
Yes.
And that's the problem. Under the guise of NATO. Order. Go ahead.
I have to agree with you on that. But on the other hand, if the drug cartels have taken over political control of Mexico, then that kind of changes the whole thing, because that's right on our southern border. And if our troops are anywhere in the world protecting anything, they should be protecting our hemisphere.
Well, my question is, how much of the drug cartels are getting their money from the CIA? You laugh, but I think it's a serious question, because if we send our military down there to fight the cartels, who are we really fighting?
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Because the drug problem keeps getting worse and worse, and the more our government does to stop it, the bigger the problem gets.
Yeah.
So they really need to take a hard look at that and maybe get some different people in there fighting the drug war.
Yeah. Well, as long as there's a market, there's going to be a way of getting the contraband to the necessary market. And there's the problem. Now, one thing the other thing I like about Tulsi Gabbard, and again, I disagree with her on many things, but at least she's a Democrat who actually has some sanity and isn't going off promoting all these crazy things. She mainly promotes sane foreign policy, at least, and she's not afraid to take on the establishment. Here's one thing that she said during that debate that I think was just excellent.
That our Democratic Party, unfortunately, is not the party that is of, by, and for the people. It is a party that has been and continues to be influenced by the foreign policy establishment in Washington, represented by Hillary Clinton and others' foreign policy, by the military-industrial complex and other greedy corporate interests.
Boy, she nailed it there, didn't she?
Yeah, she's right about that. But I don't know. I could never. Well, she's a Democrat. I would never vote for her anyway. But
I would vote for a Democrat who had the right policies on things. Now, like I say, there's other things that are deal breakers with me on her. But at least it's refreshing to hear somebody. I guess that's the thing, is it's refreshing to hear somebody say some of these things. And I just wish she would call out people like Bill Browder and and really get down into the weeds. I mean, she seems to understand the Syria stuff pretty well, because she met with Assad, and he, I think, set her straight on a lot of things, and I think that's part of the reason why they've tried to keep her out of debates, because she'll come out with some things that kind of expose certain ones, but the issue with the issue with Bill Browder, the issue with Ukraine, the issue with Genie Energy, all of these things that desperately need to be talked about. The deep root of the Democratic Party corruption, and I don't want to just put it on the Democratic Party, even though the corruption seems to be concentrated there. It's really the larger intelligence establishment, but most of those are Democrats, so they're using the Democratic Party as a tool to be able to further the corruption.
Yeah. You know what? It just occurred to me as you were talking is that it seems like the Democrats, we know that energy is the key to control of the modern world. And Democrats are trying to have that control by eliminating it, and Republicans are trying to have the control by monopolizing it.
Yeah, boy, that's a good way of saying it. Yeah, and speaking of energy, here's Bernie Sanders polishing up his hammer and sickle.
You talked about the need to make climate change a national emergency. I've introduced legislation to just do that. Now, I disagree with the thrust of the original question, because your question has said, what are we going to do in decades? We don't have decades. But the scientists are telling us that we don't get our act together within the next 8 or 9 years. We're talking about cities all over the world, major cities going underwater. We're talking about increased drought, talking about increased extreme weather disturbances. The United Nations is telling us that in the years to come, there are going to be hundreds of millions of climate refugees, causing national security issues all over the world. What we have got to do tonight, and I will do as president, is to tell the fossil fuel industry that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. And by the way, the fossil fuel industry is probably criminally liable because they have lied and lied and lied when they had the evidence that their carbon products were destroying the planet. And maybe we should think about prosecuting them as well.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Andrew.
So we're going to prosecute the fossil fuel, in other words, the oil and gas and all that, the coal industry. We're going to prosecute them for doing what they've always done, and that's providing the very lights and electricity to the microphone and sound equipment to enable that debate to take place and to begin with. Here you got a guy, Bernie Sanders, who admits he's a democratic socialist, which really is a phraseology that really means communist. I mean, come on. I mean, who are we trying to kid here? But this guy has flown around on a private jet more than probably any other candidate there on that stage, and he's wants to prosecute criminally the energy companies. I mean.
You know what? Coincidentally, I was doing some research this morning around the beginning of the Global Change Research Agency that's part of the United States. It was formally created in 1990. But I was looking at a paper that was written by the Global Change Science Committee in 1987 or 1988. Mm-hmm. And I came across the use of the phrase cradle to grave. Now, this is supposed to be a paper on the Science Committee for Global Climate Change, and they use the phrase cradle to grave. Now, where have we heard that before? It was in the education materials, right? Mm-hmm. In a letter from... what was that guy's name? Anyway, a letter to Hillary Clinton in about 1993. Same phrase. So I checked the reference that from which they were quoting, and it was to a guy named Ayers, Robert Ayers. And so I wondered, of course, is he related to Bill Ayers?
Yeah.
So I did a search on that, but... what I found out is that this guy Ayers was working by ASA, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, which is an institute that was established to work with the Soviets. And so, they were established formally in 1975. It was... Actually, they started working on creating it much earlier in connection with the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome's Aurelio Peachy is what I always call him. I know that's not how you say it, but that's how I say it. So that phrase came from that institute, had to come from that institute, and it's the study of the entire life cycle of something. And if you would think that a scientist would use a proper term and then use an analogy following, which analysts often do when they're trying to explain something to people that are not into the jargon, or when you feel like you have to explain a concept.
Yeah. Well,
so the whole idea came from the Soviet and American scientists working together as a way to harmonize our legal and cultural and social systems.
Yeah, well, the United Nations, of course, a lot of this stuff comes from the United Nations. It's a UN Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 thing with the climate all the climate crisis stuff, the global warming, the global cooling, global climate disruption, whatever terminology, dark sounding phraseology they use on a given day. And it seems to change because nothing seems to cooperate weather-wise, so they have to keep moving the goalpost. But all of this stuff comes from the United Nations and, well, really the U.S. State Department, working in tandem with the UN. But the United Nations comes from people like Alger Hiss, who was a Soviet spy.
Communist.
Yeah, total communist. And so this is the roots of all of this. So it's really all about global control. It's about ensnaring the world in their web of corruption and totalitarian control.
Yeah, well, I like what in the opening, that piece that you put together, Gordon Brown saying in the first decade of the new century is when they were going to be doing the restructuring of the global economy. And from everything that I've studied, they are centrally planning. Everything is centrally planned.
Yes.
And that's what the conversion is. I don't know that they converted the Soviet economy as much as they have ours. Sovietizing, communizing our economy.
Well, the Soviet economy and the post-Soviet economy as we have today is they want to pick that dry. And that's why they're having so many anti-Russian things today, as we've talked about before.
Well, they've been doing that to our economy, too.
Yes, they have.
Same thing.
Well, the United States has got to be destroyed. I mean, that's just from their standpoint. There's just no way around that, because if we're not destroyed, then we're an obstacle. As long as the United States Constitution is intact, and as long as the American people have their firearms and their free speech rights and their abilities to communicate on the Internet, which they're...
And their values. Most importantly, their values.
I think they've done a pretty good job at chipping away American values. I hate to say that, but...
Well, yeah, well, you're right, but there's still, especially in the West.
Yes, in the West, they're still intact.
Yeah, I don't think they'll get rid of it in the West. We'll probably be the ones that they have to dispatch.
Yeah, boy, isn't that something to be concerned about. Well, if the firearms are ever given up, that's when the liquidation begins. And I think we've said that for many, many years, but I still stand by that.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that's kept us, especially with all this insane, crazy stuff that's going on right now. On these leftists, liberals, whatever you want to call them, and not all of them are in that category. I mean, there's sane people that are genuinely deceived on the left. However, it's the far extreme, radical mob, these people that are used by the financiers like George Soros, that I'm concerned, and I think some of these people, I mean, we know a lot of them are mercenaries. We know a lot of them are hired, but it's an organization effort to try to take us out. And
yes,
but
they use those groups for destabilization. Those people are human weapons, is what they are.
Exactly, and they're useful idiots. And the other thing that people don't seem to realize is this agitation goes on both sides. The same people that are funding many of the far left groups are also funding many of the far right groups as well. Mm-hmm. And that is a fact. I got one more thing from this Democratic debate, and I'll leave it alone. I just found I couldn't resist putting this in because this is really the highlight of the evening. Joe Biden is the gift that keeps on giving, Vicky.
Isn't that the truth?
He was asked about how to deal with domestic violence. This is his response.
We, in fact, have to fundamentally change the culture of how women are treated. No man has a right to raise a hand to a woman in anger other than in self-defense, and that's rarely ever occurs. And so we have to just change the culture, period, and keep punching at it and punching at it and punching at it. It will be a big... No, I really mean it. It's a gigantic issue.
That's a gigantic issue. Why that culture of domestic violence? We have to keep punching at it.
You know what really ticks me?
Vicky,
you know what really ticks me?
Take that, domestic violence. Let me give you a little more domestic. You want to lip back at me? I'll take care of you. Sorry.
Well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So it was a problem. It was a problem in the early 1970s. But women organized, and when the National Organization for Women first started, they had legitimate points. Now, if you got beat up by your husband and you called the police were likely to tell you, hey, sorry, he's your husband. And that's the truth. That's the God's honest truth.
Well, I'm not suggesting.
But all of that changed. It changed already. But they're trying to, they keep bringing this old stuff up as if it's current today.
Yeah.
And that's not true.
Well, that's because it rings true to the base. The base, here's an opportunity to villainize.
It's not. It's the new base. It's the young women who don't know the difference. They don't know.
Well, domestic
violence. They don't know
violence.
what it was like back then. They don't know what our society went through what women went through to change that.
Well, domestic violence is still a problem today, and it will always be a problem. But that's not
like it was.
Well, maybe not. But the difficulty here, the reason why they bring it up is it's an opportunity to villainize men, and that rings true to the base. Any group that you want to villainize, you keep bringing up the bad things about that group.
Right. Well, exactly. That's what I mean. They keep dredging up slavery, dredging up women's issues. These things were solved a long time ago. Now, you can never have a society that is 100% perfect on everything. If it was a societal problem, it's because there are people that won't follow the rules of society. And that will never, ever change.
Well, the funny thing about that clip was that, he's talking about domestic violence, and he says we have to keep punching at it. So the domestic violence, I don't know. It's just...
it is to beat down men. I saw an article recently that white males are statistically the most likely to be committing suicide. And it's because of all of these tactics of demoralization and within the destabilization paradigm. And it's because they keep tearing them down. And it makes me so angry.
Yeah, apparently the DNC dropped in the middle of the debate. Their fundraising numbers are way down, apparently. So that's interesting. I don't think the impeachment stuff is working out in their favor. In fact, I know it isn't. It's a real embarrassment.
It should be. Anybody with half a brain can see,
Well, they can if they listen to it. They can if they... But look, here's the thing. Many of these sessions on Capitol Hill they're like 7-8 hours long.
That's true. You got to be a brute for punishment to listen to them.
Some of the stuff I listen to, and I admit I haven't listened to all of it because nobody can. I mean, if you have a life outside of this, you don't have time to listen to all of this stuff. And so I listened to the first day, and what I do a lot of times with videos that are long, that are these hearings, is I'll put them on 1.5 or 2.0 speed. I'll put them on double speed so I can go through and listen to what's being said, because to listen to them in real time is it would just eat up so much time you can't possibly do. So I speed up the video and listen to it so I can get to the good parts, and then I have to stop it, and go back and put it on regular speed to clip it. If what I generally do is I'll go through a hearing the first time and I'll take notes about the impertinent parts with time codes, so I know where certain things are. And then after I'm done, I'll go back and I'll pick out which parts that are the most important, and I'll clip those. But but it's all time consuming, and nobody has 7 or 8 hours to sit there through a hearing and wait. So what they do is they rely upon the media to tell them the truth, and we know where that goes wrong. I mean, MSNBC, CNN.
You are fake news.
That's it. So as soon as they come out with all of this stuff, you got Rachel Maddow talking to the left, and she's completely lying about what's actually happened during the day. I mean, you got this guy Sondland who had an opening statement. I got some audio here. I should probably just get to that. I'm talking about the media lying, though. A good example of that. I got a video clip, which it's pointless to play it on the air because it's video. You have to see the video. But they had CNN had their lower third during the debate, during Sondland's testimony. Ambassador Sondland was up there giving testimony. CNN had one thing on there, Sondland connects. I forget exactly what it says. I'd have to go watch the video again. I should have written it down. But they said that he had connected something, he conflated something with something else. And then as the lower third is on the air, Vicky, Sondland is saying something exactly opposite. He's saying the exact opposite of what's on CNN's lower third. So when he says that, then CNN has to turn around and change their lower third on the air. So they changed it like a minute or two later to reflect something else. So they're making allegations that he did not say on their lower third.
That is interesting because a lot of times, especially in bars and restaurants, maybe airports, you don't really hear the sound. You just read the
whatever's down on the lower third, on the banner.
Yeah.
So, but he debunked what CNN was saying as it was on the air. It's just incredible to watch this propaganda take place in real time. Anyway, here's some opening remarks by Devin Nunes.
They say that if the facts are against you, argue the law. If the law is against you, argue the facts. And if both are against you, pound the table and yell like hell. It seems at law school these days, it's teaching their students a fourth tactic. If the facts and the law are against you, simply rig the game and hope your audience is too stupid to catch your duplicity. This is not an impeachment inquiry, it's an impeachment inquisition. In the Middle Ages, the inquisitor was free to act on his own and bring suit against any person who was even vaguely the subject of the lowest rumor. And the accused was denied any right to confront their accusers. Incredibly, or maybe not so much, given the Democrats' track record, an Inquisition victim had more rights than the Democrats are giving the president. After all, Inquisition victims had the right to know their accuser's name. For those of you at home, it's time to change the channel, turn down the volume, or hide the kids, put them to bed. Now I yield to Mr. Schiff for Story Time Hour.
I thank the gentleman, as always, for his remarks.
Yeah, thank you for your remarks.
I found out, I didn't know this, Adam Schiff is a failed scriptwriter in real life.
Oh, really? I didn't know that either.
I didn't know that either. I was in a chat room watching, I guess we were watching the hearings or something, and somebody said that. After I'd commented that this sounds like a bad script, he really was one.
He's a failed representative too, and after this he might be out of work. I don't know.
I think the biggest tell about how failed he is in his closing comments. He was trying to be profound and do quotable kinds of statements, because that goes into history. But it was bad. It was really bad. Grade B movie.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is a big grade B movie, or grade Z. It doesn't make any grade, really. Because, nobody could watch this thing and say if you're objective about it. And the problem is, half the country, no matter what you do, is going to believe Trump is guilty. And half the country, no matter what you do, is going to believe that Trump is innocent.
Guilty of what, though? It's not illegal to withhold, even if he did say there's a quid pro quo, it wasn't to require countries to do things in order to get U.S. aid is not unprecedented. They do it all the damn time.
Of course they do. And they withhold U.S. aid for a variety of reasons, many of them bureaucratic.
Right. And it just happens to be in this instance that it is Joe Biden's son, but that doesn't make any difference. It's still obviously corrupt. So,
well, this ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, he testified in his opening statement that there was a quid pro quo. And
wasn't it painful to listen to him?
Yes, absolutely. But then it looked like the Democrats might have someone who was finally able to say something that, implicated the president in some way. There might be a quid pro quo. But then during his... Well, here's a little bit of his testimony during his opening statement.
I know that members of this committee frequently frame these complicated issues in the form of a simple question. Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, with regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes. Everyone was in the loop. It was no secret. Everyone was informed via email on July 19th, days before the presidential call.
Okay, so that sounds pretty damning, doesn't it? But then you get into the testimony where he's actually being drilled by the various representatives and the council, and then the whole thing starts falling apart. Here's Adam Schiff trying and failing. Actually, I think let's see. Let me make sure I go in the proper order here. This is not Adam Schiff. The whole thing. Let's see this. Okay, here he is admitting that President Trump didn't want a quid pro quo.
But I believe I just asked him an open-ended question, Mr. Chairman. What do you want from Ukraine?
Okay, now I want to set this up properly, because prior to this point, all you heard was various witnesses paraded across the TV screen on C-SPAN, which supposedly, this one told me this and this one told me that, who got it from here and got it from somewhere else. We played some of that audio last week. All the hearsay nonsense, where it's just, I heard this and I heard that. No, I didn't hear the call, and no, I never talked to the president, and blah, blah, blah. But hey, I think I know something about it. So now you finally got a guy, ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, who supposedly knows. He talked to the president, right? So he's good. Here's the smoking gun. Here's what we're going to hear.
Keep hearing all these different ideas and theories and this and that. What do you want? And it was a very short, abrupt conversation. He was not in a good mood. And he just said, I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky to do the right thing. Something to that effect.
Okay, so that sounds pretty damning, doesn't it? Where he talks to the president, and the president says he doesn't want a quid pro quo. I don't want anything from Zelensky. I mean, this is just insane, Vicky.
Well, I think Sondland said later on in the hearing, made an assumption.
Yes.
That
I got that audio as well.
Trump wanted a quid pro quo. And, when you're working on a project with people, it's kind of like you all kind of know what's going on. It doesn't have, and nothing has to be articulated in terms of, some things. It's just everybody knows, but you can't hang somebody for what their assumption is, what they think they know.
This whole thing is so ridiculous. It is just astounding, and anybody who is objective at all would see it for what it is, a political circus. Here's Adam Schiff trying to rescue the Democrats' narrative.
Although President Trump claimed to you there was no quid pro quo, he also made it clear to you in that call that President Zelensky had to, quote, clear things up and do it in public. You don't have a reason to dispute that's what
I don't have any reason to dispute the clear things up and do it in public. What I'm trying to be very clear about was President Trump never told me directly that the aid was tied to that statement.
But in that same conversation you had with him about the aid, about the quid pro quo, he told you that President Zelensky had to, quote, clear things up and do it in public, correct?
I did not have a conversation with him about the aid. I had a conversation with him, as referenced in my text, about quid pro quo.
Well, the quid pro quo you were discussing was over the aid, correct?
No. President Trump, when I asked him the open-ended question, as I testified previously, what do you want from Ukraine? His answer was, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky to do the right thing. That's all I got from President Trump.
Boy, where's the smoking gun here? It's not going very well for Mr. Schiff, is it?
No, you know what, that guy Sondland, he's like a loose cannon.
Yeah, he's kind of like Trump.
He muddies the water, and then he kind of clears it up, and then he muddies it again.
Well, and here's the thing about that, as we'll see as we progress here, his opening statement doesn't seem to reflect his testimony. His opening statement was written by Democrats on his illegal team who gave money to the Clintons, at least to the Democratic Party.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I wonder what's going on here. Can you say conflict of interest? So, here he is again, blowing up the narrative. Despite his opening statement, there is no quid pro quo, folks.
No one on this planet told you that President Trump was tying aid to investigations. Yes or no?
Yes.
So, you really have no testimony today that ties President Trump to a scheme to withhold aid from Ukraine in exchange for these investigations?
Other than my own presumption.
Which is nothing.
There you go. That's the comment. That's the comment that you were just referencing a moment ago.
Yeah.
His presumption. Boy, presumption. But if you could convict somebody in the court of law, like you were just saying a moment ago, on a presumption, there would be no person in this country that could be safe from being convicted. As soon as anybody on anybody's radar
in this country,
huh?
There's no person in this country that's safe from being convicted of anything.
Well, that's true.
Because there is no integrity in the Department of Justice. I saw that myself personally.
Well, and there's no integrity in many prosecutors' office either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and many times your defense attorney doesn't have any integrity. They're working with the prosecution to send you up the river.
Well, as soon as they get their bar license, it's like, they give up integrity.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? Mm-hmm. So, Representative Jim Jordan, he's drilling down on Sondland and how his opening statement left out a key detail that Trump told him he didn't want anything from the president of Ukraine.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Ambassador, when did it happen?
When did what happen?
The announcement. When did President Zelensky announce that the investigation was going to happen? On page 14, you said this. Was there a quid pro quo? Your opening statement. As I testified previously, with regard to a requested White House call, White House meeting, the answer is yes, that there needed to be a public statement from President Zelensky. When the chairman asked you about the security assistance dollars, you said there needed to be a public announcement from Zelensky. So I'm asking you a simple question. When did that happen?
Never did.
Never did. They got the call July 25th. They got the meeting, not in the White House, but in New York on September 25th. They got the money on September 11th. When did the meeting happen again?
Never did.
You don't know who was in the meeting?
Which meeting are you referring to?
The meeting that never happened. Who was in it? You know how Zelensky announced it? Did he tweet it? Did he do a press statement? Did he do a press conference? You know how that happened? I mean, you got all three of them wrong. They get the call, they get the meeting, they get the money. It's not 2 + 2, it's 0 for 3. I mean, I've never seen anything like this. And you told Mr. Castor that the president never told you that the announcement had to happen to get anything. In fact, he didn't just not tell you that. He explicitly said the opposite. The gentleman from Texas just read it. You said to the President of the United States, what do you want from Ukraine? The President, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I want Zelensky to do the right thing. I want him to do what he ran on. What did he run on, Ambassador Sondland?
Transparency.
And dealing with corruption, right?
That's right.
Mr. Castor raised another important point. Why didn't you put that statement in your opening statement? I think you said you couldn't fit it in. Is that right? Said we might be here for 46 minutes instead of 45 minutes.
It wasn't purposeful, trust me.
Wasn't purposeful?
No.
Couldn't fit it in a 23-page opener. The most important statement about the subject matter at hand, the President unites in a direct conversation with you about the issue at hand, and the President says, let me read it one more time. What do you want from Ukraine, Mr. President? I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I want this new guy, brand new guy in politics. His party just took over. I want Zelensky to do the right thing. I want him to run on and do what he ran on, which is deal with corruption. And you can't find time to fit that in a 23-page opening statement.
Now, the question is, I said earlier about the Democrats writing his opening statement. I got that little nugget from Tucker Carlson at Fox News. Tucker is one of the people that I think are doing a stellar job. Now, of course, he has his limitations. For instance, he can't talk about the fact that Rupert Murdoch sits on the board of Genie Energy with Jacob Rothschild, who is a close associate of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who is a close associate of Bill Browder. So that whole thing is a corruption there, and part of the reason why you will never hear the truth about all of this stuff that's going on with the Magnitsky Act and these efforts at trying to punish the Russians through and put all these economic sanctions on these officials without any due process. You'll never hear that from Fox News, but Tucker Carlson at least is exposing a lot of things that need to be exposed. And so I have a lot of respect for the man. And I don't say that lightly because I don't say it about very many people in the media today. But he was commenting on this issue. Why the contradiction?
So why wasn't that fact, and it's not a small point, by the way, it's the point on which the entire impeachment hangs, why wasn't that point included in Sondland's opening statement? Well, we don't know, really. But here's one possible explanation. The statement was likely drafted by Sondland's legal team, and all four of his attorneys, it turns out, because we checked, are Democratic donors. The man seated next to Gordon Sondland today during the hearing, that would be a man called Robert Luskin. He has given over $130,000 to the Democrats over the years. Luskin also represented FBI informant Stefan Halper during the Russia hoax not too long ago. So is it possible that someone like Luskin was thinking about more than his client's personal interests in this case? Could impeaching public enemy number one have crossed his mind? We don't know, but it doesn't seem implausible. We should also point out something that the press conveniently overlooked in its analysis today for the most part. Gordon Sondland and his family have been under intense political pressure.
Yeah, and he goes on to talk about how Gordon Sondland's business is being targeted for protests by these extreme left mobs.
Oh,
so,
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, and what's interesting, and this brings up another point too, because I saw that once on. There's a number of videos that people put up. I don't subscribe to cable, okay, so I can't get this stuff. I have to find these videos online, or I can't get them because I don't pay money for access to these networks. But I've noticed people tend to put up Tucker Carlson's videos after the show, and I don't know. Lately, I've been noticing YouTube has been shortening videos down to like 1 or 2 seconds.
Yes, I've experienced that where I wanted to watch a video and it lasts about 1 second.
Yes, this is not the person posting the video doing this. Apparently they have an algorithm, and I don't know why they're doing it. It may be for copyright reasons.
Well, then they should just take it down, but they shouldn't. I mean, it seems to me that it's of vandalism, first of all, to do that. And if it shouldn't be there, then take it down and fight it out with whoever the...
Well, what's fascinating about it? Well, and the other thing is maybe they're leaving them up so that it skews the search results. You can't, if somebody does upload a whole show, and the other thing I noticed. Well, let me finish one thought before I start another. When you search for a specific show, it'll come up with all these 1 to 2 second videos that really are worthless. So it's a complete clutter. It's almost like it's left there to clutter up the search results on YouTube. So you can't find anything of real value.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
But the other thing I was going to say about that is that I've noticed that there are certain videos that are edited. I mean, he started talking about how this guy was targeted, and it cuts over to something else. I mean, it cuts over to a later part of the show. So there are pieces of the show that's left out. And I don't know where whoever's posting these videos, where they're getting them from, but it's across multiple accounts that have the same show. It leaves out the same information. It's just really weird.
That kind of seems to me like a troll kind of campaign.
But I don't know why you would even post it in the first place. It's very bizarre.
Well, like you say, to skew the search results. If when you search, you get a whole bunch of videos that are like 1 second long. I myself just give up and move on, go to something else.
Yeah, well, I have to. If it's something I know is there and it's really important, I don't have that choice so easily. I mean, I guess I have to. If you have to, you have to. But I try to find it then on some other site other than YouTube. But YouTube has really become
Fox News. You can always go to their website.
Well, but then you have to pay them money. And
oh, really?
Yes.
That must be new, because you used to be able to go there and watch each show.
No, you can't watch each show. Not unless you have cable. They'll prompt you for a cable subscription of some kind. Anyway, here's Trump's reaction to the Sondland testimony.
I'm going to go very quickly, just a quick comment on what's going on in terms of testimony with Ambassador Sondland. And I just noticed one thing, and I would say that means it's all over. What do you want from Ukraine? He asks me, screaming. What do you want from Ukraine? I keep hearing all these different ideas and theories. This is Ambassador Sondland speaking to me. Just happened. To which I turned off the television. What do you want from Ukraine? I keep hearing all these different ideas and theories. What do you want? What do you want? It was a very short and abrupt conversation that he had with me. They said he was not in a good mood. I'm always in a good mood. I don't know what that is. He just said, now he's talking about what my response. So he's going, what do you want? What do you want? I hear all these theories. What do you want, right? And now, here's my response that he gave. Just gave. Ready? You have the cameras rolling? I want nothing. That's what I want from Ukraine. That's what I said. I want nothing. I said it twice. So he goes, he asked me the question, what do you want? I keep hearing all these things. What do you want? He finally gets me. I don't know him very well. I have not spoken to him much. This is not a man I know well. Seems like a nice guy, though. But I don't know him well. He was with other candidates. He actually supported other candidates. Not me. Came in late. But here's my response. Now, if you weren't fake news, you'd cover it properly. I say to the ambassador in response, I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky, President Zelensky, to do the right thing. So here's my answer. I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky to do the right thing. Then he says, this is the final word from the President of the United States. I want nothing. Thank you, folks. Have a good time. I'm going to Texas.
So, anyway, that's Trump in his usual style. About to get on a helicopter, and that's really, I don't know if that's the only press conference they hold anymore. But after that CNN, Jim Acosta made a total ass of himself and fought in court to be able to disrupt the press conferences. Trump now is pretty much done away with press conferences except for when he's on the go getting ready to climb aboard a helicopter. At least as far as I know.
I'm not aware of what you're talking about there. Maybe after are you going to go to break in a minute?
Yeah, in a moment. Yes.
Maybe after the break you can tell me what that's about, because I didn't hear that.
Oh, you didn't hear about the Jim Acosta thing?
No, huh?
Oh, yeah. He kept trying to disrupt the press conference. It's been going on. This happened back a good while ago. Trump would try to shut him up and move on, and Jim Acosta just kept on. And finally, Jim Acosta's press credentials were revoked because he wouldn't respect the process, and CNN and Jim Acosta went to court, and of course the court's going to come down on the side of CNN because they come down against President Trump in everything, and so he was faced with going to have this guy in the press conference all the time disrupting. Because of the court, and this is where I say, we'll get into this a little bit later because we got some stuff, regarding how the Bill Barr's testimony before the Federalist Society, where he's talking about how the executive branch is losing authority, it's losing power, it's losing ground to the other branches of government, which sounds counterintuitive when you think about how many presidents have tried to increase their authority over the years through executive orders and other means, doing overreach. But in fact, the Trump presidency has demonstrated that if you're going against and trying to be a real president, in many cases, you have no power. They run roughshod over you. Yeah. So, anyway, let's go ahead and take the break, and we'll come back and we'll continue. I got a few more of the impeachment stuff, and we'll move on to other things. Stay with us. This is Govern America.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America, hour number 2, as we continue on here on this 23rd of November, 2019. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. GovernAmerica.com is the website for the show. GovernAmerica.com, where you can get all the past broadcasts. And you can also go to thetechnocratictyranny.com. TheTechnocraticTyranny.com is Vicky Davis's website. You want to go ahead and give out your other information, Vicky?
Yeah, well, my older website is channelingreality.com, but you can get to either one of them from the other one. So,
yeah.
But I have a lot of research on my web.
Original research.
Yeah, they're not as much articles as they are research.
By the way, I wanted to say thanks to Jane MC in the chat room. because she posted what I was talking about earlier, how CNN had that lower third that was reflect completely at odds with the testimony. Quote, this is what she posted. After you testified, Chairman Adam Schiff ran out and gave a press conference and said he gets to impeach the President of the United States because of your testimony. And if you pull up CNN today, right now, their banner says, quote, Sondland ties Trump to withholding aid, Turner said. And that's what they had on the lower third. During Sondland's testimony, they had Sondland ties Trump to withholding aid, even as Sondland was saying the exact opposite. So you talk about I don't know, does the term Orwellian come into play here? I mean, it's completely opposite of what was going on. So I think Orwellian would apply.
Well, that guy Sondland, he's kind of like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. I mean, it's the Democrats' fault because they ran out.
He's just a tool. He's just a tool in the arsenal. And, they screen these people in the basement of the Capitol in secret meetings. It is unbelievable what's going on here. But what you're really watching is the disintegration of our republic. And the reason why I've spent so much time on this today and last week, even though it's something, eventually it'll pass, and they'll impeach or they won't impeach. But the point is that what we're seeing here is a complete collapse of our republic. When there's no integrity and no honesty.
That's the objective of color revolutions. I bet you they have a constitution rewritten, ready to pull out of the box to hand to us.
Well, I wouldn't doubt that one bit. And these clowns on Capitol Hill, and these clowns that are conducting constitutional conventions, trying to get us into a constitutional convention to undo what our existing Constitution already provides for. We know that they already have a Constitution written. The Rockefellers spent many, many millions of dollars many years ago. The Constitution of the New States of America. Look that up, folks.
Oh,
the Constitution for the New States of America. We've talked about it before on the broadcast. But anyway, getting back, here's Sondland's here's Sondland being questioned by GOP legal counsel. Oops. If I can get the button pushed.
Did the president ever tell you personally about any preconditions for anything?
No.
Okay, so the president never told you about any preconditions for the aid to be released?
No.
The president never told you about any preconditions for a White House meeting?
Personally, no.
You said you didn't have your records or your documents from the State Department, but if you did, there wouldn't be any document or record that ties President Trump personally to any of this, correct?
Boy, I don't want to speculate what would be
your documents or records.
I don't recall anything like that.
No. Okay, big smoking gun there. Huge. I mean, he's going up. Trump is going up the river now. It's anybody watching this. It's a circus freak show, and I think it's going to help Trump. I mean, I don't see how anybody that's honest. And again, I come back to the comments I made earlier. The left, if you're hardcore left, you're going to think Trump's guilty. You already think Trump's evil and he's a dictator and he's racist and he's all these other things they've been saying about him. So you're not going to be moved no matter what happens on Capitol Hill. And if you're on the right and you're completely supporting Trump, there's many people on the right, unfortunately, that Trump can do no wrong. And there are certain things that he's done. Bombing Syria. I think the argument could be made that that's an impeachable offense. There's no reason why he should have bombed Syria. So we could make that argument. There are certain things. I mean, his children, I believe, we've covered in the past, they're hawking this EB-5 visa program. That's something that probably should be looked into. There are issues there that could be dealt with, could be looked into, but a phone call with a Ukrainian leader asking him to uncover real corruption and corruption that we know is going on and has gone on with the former Vice President Biden and his son, and with Alexander Chalupa trying to dig up dirt on Trump, and in fact causing Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, to resign. because of James Comey's FBI having an office in the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, and they released the information causing Paul Manafort to resign. Here you have real foreign meddling in the U.S. election, the thing they accused Russia of, they were using Ukraine to do after they overthrew the government of Ukraine. It is just unbelievable. And none of this gets talked about very widely at all.
Well, you know what? I've been going through what happened after the Berlin Wall came down. And when George Herbert Walker Bush had the summit in Malta with Gorbachev, they tried, what's his name, Eagleberger tried to characterize it as just a meeting and not a summit. But they were discussing really substantive issues. And looks to me like that all of the major changes in our country were decided upon at that Malta meeting, and it included what basically was the integration through exchanges with the Soviets of our government employees, our government policy, everything. And George Washington University has an archive of reports from the Malta Summit. And I would really recommend that anybody that's interested in this subject go look at those documents. And in particular, document 11 is of special importance because it talks about an ecological code of behavior, north-south perspectives, which of course came to be the NAFTA agreement, which is the unionization of the North American continent.
Yeah.
Just like the Soviet Union, it just happens to be that there are...
That again? It just happens to be what?
Only 3 countries. Yes. Canada, the United States, and Mexico.
Well, we know that they were going to extend that.
Still the unionization of those 3 countries,
well, they were
just
going
like
to
the
extend
Soviet Union was.
The goal was to create the free trade area of the Americas, extending it down all the way to the farthest southern hemisphere.
Yeah, Tierra del Fuego, but in Argentina. But, you know, they do these things step by step.
Yes.
So they had to create the North American Union and then add Central America, which was done through the CAFTA agreement, and then, of course, moving on down to South America.
Yep.
But the Malta meeting is, those documents are
pivotal.
really important.
Very, very interesting. Representative Mike, I think this is the last one I've got because I could have pulled more of this, but I think we're making the point here. There's nothing there. There's nothing there in terms of what they're doing. You got Kurt Volker being drilled by Mike Turner. Kurt Volker was the U.S. Special Representative to Ukraine and served as the executive director of the McCain Institute for International Leadership.
A lot of people are talking about...
What's that?
Which is part of NED, the National Endowment for Democracy.
Interesting.
A lot of people are talking about their perceptions, their beliefs, their feelings even, what they heard, and their understandings and their thoughts. Ambassador Taylor, Mr. Kent, Ambassador Yovanovitch, and Lieutenant Colonel Vendeman all had conversations with each other and with other people and all had a whole bunch of hearsay. But I can assure you this boils down to just one thing. This is an impeachment inquiry concerning the President of the United States. So the only thing that matters, besides all these people talking to each other and all their feelings and all of their thoughts and understandings, it really only comes down to what did the President of the United States intend, and what did he say, and what did the Ukrainians understand or hear? Ambassador Volker, you're one of the first people that we've had in these open public testimony that's had conversations with both. So I get to ask you. You had a meeting with the President of the United States, and you believe that the policy issues that he raised concerning Ukraine were valid. correct?
Yes.
Did the President of the United States ever say to you that he was not going to allow aid for the United States to go to the Ukraine unless there were investigations into Burisma, the Bidens, or the 2016 elections?
No, he did not.
Did the Ukrainians ever tell you that they understood that they would not get a meeting with the President of the United States, a phone call with the President of the United States, military aid, or foreign aid from the United States unless they undertook investigations of Burisma, the Bidens, or the 2016 elections?
No, they did not.
You know, pretty much, Ambassador Volker, you just took apart their entire case.
Yeah. Yeah, and yet half the country is still going to believe, because they're being told lies by their media outlet of choice, that it's not the way it really is, because they're not going to take the time to listen to the hearings. And so Rachel Maddow and can get on TV and go off the opening statement and ignore the real testimony and just point to that and say, look here, see, here's the smoking gun. It's unbelievable. We're living in the age of imbecility. I mean, it is. It's a total age of imbecility. And if you doubt that, I present you with Illinois Democrat Mike Quigley. He seems to think rumor and gossip are all you need to make a strong case in court or in Congress. I was wrong. I had one more after the last one. Listen to what he says here, because all you've heard is hearsay evidence, quote-unquote evidence, because hearsay is not real evidence. But if you listen to this guy, he thinks it is.
And if, I guess to close primer on hearsay, I think the American public needs to be reminded that countless people have been convicted on hearsay because the courts have routinely allowed and created needed exceptions to hearsay. Hearsay can be much better evidence than direct, as we have learned in painful instances, and it's certainly valid in this instance.
Well, gentlemen, yield, because none of those exceptions would apply to this testimony.
Hearsay evidence is better than direct evidence now, Vicky.
Well, I saw that in action, where hearsay printed in a newspaper was used as evidence in a pretrial. And there is a federal court rule. I don't know if I can't remember if it's a statute or if it's just a court rule, but they allow hearsay evidence.
Well, sure, they may allow it, but
they shouldn't.
But the point is, he's trying to make the argument, and it has made the argument, not successfully, because I don't know anybody with an ounce of sense. And there's the problem. Many people don't have ounces of sense. But I don't know anybody that has any sense that would think that hearsay is better than direct evidence. I mean, if you got...
Depends on what your objective is.
Well, yeah, that's true. But hearsay, if you got direct evidence is always better than hearsay.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, definitely. And in American law, under American law, it used to be that you had to have direct evidence, but they changed that to allow hearsay.
Well, in this case,
which is proof positive that we're really not operating under American law, as far as I'm concerned.
It's just incredible.
The whole thing, though, is the whole spectacle is an embarrassment to our country.
Yes,
the stupidity of it, the absolute stupidity of it, is making the United States look ridiculous.
Yeah, we look like I can't imagine how we're not a laughingstock all over the world. I don't know how anybody would take the United States seriously after this. But this is the type of Banana Republic type stuff that we're witnessing develop in our country. And it's very bad for the country for a variety of reasons, not the least of which you pointed out that it makes us, not respected around the world, but it also is creating instability politically.
Yes.
When we're this politically unstable, and then you've got everybody so divided, and the media stirs the pot to the point where rationality, common sense, and logic are just completely thrown out the window. I mean, I played that last clip to make this point. He's making an argument that is so off the charts ridiculous. Rumor, hearsay, is better than direct evidence. Now, you would have to be absolutely crazy to think that.
Yeah. Well, and what makes people like us the quote, kind of like domestic enemies is because we don't really entertain stupidity. I don't. If somebody is saying something stupid, I feel like calling it out.
Yeah. Well, it should be called out.
And I do if I want to,
It should be called out by everybody. This guy should be ridiculed. The age of imbecility. Here's Andrew Weissman. He's the former Department of Justice official who worked on the Mueller team. This is the man who essentially ran the Mueller investigation. We talk about Project Mockingbird. Well, he's taking a job at MSNBC. Mockingbird was covert. They're just coming right out now and overtly propagandizing people. He was on MSNBC. I guess he's a pundit there now. Now, this clown went on here, and he's telling you why he thinks that Trump doesn't care if the Kremlin eavesdrops on Trump's conversations.
Why wasn't the president and Ambassador Sondland worried about the fact that the Russians would undoubtedly, in Ukraine, be able to hear this conversation?
What are the scenarios? Why wouldn't they be?
Well, the issue would be because this is Ari's point, which is if you're sitting there thinking, I don't really care because the Russians are going to be siding with me in the 2020 election, then you're all on the same team.
Now, does this sound like a guy you would trust to run a serious investigation?
No.
I mean, I wouldn't trust this guy to babysit my dog. And yet he's on MSNBC telling the people something that complete conjecture on his part, complete opinion, totally is not based on any facts whatsoever.
Well, we have Pravda USA. That's what the mainstream media is Pravda USA.
Yeah.
So it's just fortunate that we have the internet so that we can all go out and see things for ourselves.
Yeah.
And make our own decisions.
The Gateway Pundit, by the way, and where is this supposed whistleblower, this quote unquote, whistleblower, who's really, we should call a whistle leaker. That's what the Gateway Pundit called him, a whistle leaker. I like that better because that's really what he is. He's a leaker. But this who's alleged to be Eric Ciaramella, and we can't have his name said. Adam Schiff claims, the chairman of this circus on Capitol Hill, claims he doesn't even know who he is. Yeah, and nobody believes him. Why would you?
I've been watching Congress for a long time, and I have never seen a case where where the members of Congress did not know the name of a witness.
I think they know, but they're not allowed to say it, and they're all scared. They're all scared. They're scared of the CIA. They're scared of the intelligence establishment. This really speaks to where we are as a country, Vicky. These people are all scared to say the name. They've been told they better not, and so they comply. They fall in line like a bunch of dominoes because they're not allowed to do this, and there's going to be consequences if they do, so they're not going to say it. It's unbelievable how much control and power an agency has over our supposed lawmaking body.
Well, I think it's because of the stealth technology that they have everywhere. They have all the phones tapped. I do think there is surveillance. I'm sure that the Capitol building probably has cameras and microphones and everywhere.
Absolutely,
so that they probably can't even go use the urinal without cameras on them.
I'm sure. But anyway, the Gateway Pundit published a photo where this Eric Ciaramella is shaking hands with Obama in the White House. So for whatever that's worth, well, I guess it came from the Washington Examiner, but it was published on the Gateway Pundit as well, and we'll put that in the show notes. For whatever it's worth, But, we know this guy's a Democratic operative. and the fact that he's tied to the CIA, and this is well documented, and nobody can say his name except for us here in the alternative media, makes you. What do you say about that?
It makes me disappointed that the members of Congress on the Republican side don't at least draw straws and pick a sacrificial lamb to give the country the name of the person.
Yeah, somebody should fall on their sword.
Sometimes that has to be done,
Well, Peter Schweizer, I wanted to turn a corner here. He's the author who wrote, which it really isn't turning a corner at all, to be honest with you. He's the author who wrote Clinton Cash. It was an excellent book. He's back now with another book called Secret Empires. This is something that you brought to my attention, recently. He's exposing government corruption and real quid pro quos of politicians, real ones, in both political parties. Now, he's talking about how politicians are using various family members to offshore their corruption. This is in line with, we've seen what's going on with Hunter Biden. He has deals in China. He had deals in Burisma in Ukraine. And that's really what a lot of this, how this impeachment stuff started, is Trump was asking to root out corruption in Ukraine and asking Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, in that phone call, to look into some of this stuff and to look into what happened with the 2016 election. That's what's got them all freaked out, because here is the tip of the spear. If Trump allows them to get into all of this stuff, all of their corruption, all of their dirty little secrets are going to be revealed. And they cannot let that happen. Anyway, here's Peter Schweizer talking about some of the things regarding his book, Secret Empires.
Well, I think the biggest surprise was the extent to which, when you trace the money, a lot of it ends up coming from foreign governments. Not foreign corporations, not American companies operating overseas, but foreign governments. And foreign governments from China, oligarchs in places like Ukraine, have come to realize that in Washington, D.C., our politicians can do a lot for them. They can also do a lot against them. And they're willing to, frankly, throw big money at the political families of our leaders in order to get favorable policy outcomes. So I was a little surprised at how brazen it was, and also the amounts of money. The $90,000 in the freezer, I certainly don't want to minimize $90,000. But when you compare it to, in some cases, $1 billion with a B, private equity deals that are being done with the family members of American politicians, that shocked me, too, the amount of money.
So your research, Peter, on Clinton Cash, is this what kind of opened the door for you to go down this road and see the connection to foreign money?
That's a great question. Yeah, in a way, Clinton Cash was the gateway for this. What we exposed in Clinton Cash was the fact that while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, you had a lot of foreign entities that were throwing money at the Clintons, and that included contributions to the Clinton Foundation, inflated speaking fees, you name it. The pattern here is similar, but it's slightly different. I think if the Clintons made a mistake, it was essentially funneling the money directly through Bill while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. And that required them to disclose the money that they were getting. What I think the politicians have learned, whether it's Republican or Democrat, is don't steer the money to your spouse, steer the money to an adult child, maybe to a sister or somebody that doesn't have to disclose their income. Again, that's the reason I called this Secret Empires, because think about this for a second. Whether you are Joe Biden, whether you are Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a Republican or Democrat, you have to disclose a $500 campaign contribution because we have to know who's funding their campaigns. You have to disclose $500 in stock that you might have in, say, General Electric, because we want to know what your financial interests are. But they don't have to disclose if their adult child is getting $1 billion private equity deal from the government of China. And it seems to me that's a lot bigger conflict than a $500 campaign contribution.
Yeah, we're talking about bribery here. We're talking about real quid pro quos, not the fictional stuff that you're hearing about on Capitol Hill, that they're trying which they're trying to impeach the president.
Yeah, and it isn't just the Democrats that are doing that; the Republicans are doing that as well.
Absolutely, and
so, which is why they've all kind of wanted to stay away from that.
Yeah, exactly. It's why they're flipping out. And to illustrate that point, what you just said, there were four main characters he focused upon in the book, and they weren't all Democrats. Now, the Clinton Foundation was the springboard for a lot of this foreign corruption, but other politicians are now copying the Clintons, and that's what he's saying here, taking foreign bribes, basically laundering them through family members. That's what we're really talking about here. We're talking about a form of money laundering to avoid disclosure. And then tailoring the foreign policy decisions accordingly. You were going to say something?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that actually it's just a variation on a theme that started even before that, because I went back in my own files and I found a notes document that or an article that I copied from 2003. And it was on the corruption of Orrin Hatch and his son. His son was working for a lobbying firm. Well, there's also John Breaux, I don't know if you remember him, and Chester Lott, the sons of two powerful senators that were lobbyists for Bell South. And it was at the time, the communications, both of the senators were on the communications committee. And so, the sons of these senators were bringing in big money for lobbying. And supposedly, of course, they never talked to their fathers about business. And and Orrin Hatch's son is in here, Tom Daschle's son, where they were all using family members to rake in money.
To launder money. I mean,
right.
to skirt the law.
Thing with the Ukraine deal, all they did was offshore the corruption.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, continuing on with some of this.
In December of 2013, Joe Biden flies on Air Force Two to Beijing, China. He's got a whole host of issues he's got to grapple with Beijing on, from the territorial claims they're making in the South China Sea to issues related to trade, technology, North Korea, you name it. Well, on Air Force Two with Vice President Biden is his son, Hunter Biden. Now, Joe Biden gets widely criticized after this trip for going soft on Beijing. And 10 days after they return to Washington, D.C., Hunter Biden's firm, Rosemont Seneca Partners, strikes a $1 billion deal, that's with a B, with the government of China. Now, what's important here, Perry, is this is not a Chinese company. This is not an American company doing business in China. This is the Chinese government. And it's done through this small firm called Rosemont Seneca Partners. Rosemont Seneca Partners involves Hunter Biden, the son of the vice president. It involves Chris Hines, who is the son or stepson of the Secretary of State, John Kerry. And it includes a guy named Devin Archer, who is a longtime John Kerry aide. And this deal with the Chinese government is unprecedented. It's the first of three deals that the son of the vice president does with the Chinese government while his father is trying to negotiate with the Chinese. And it's a massive conflict of interest. And I think that amount of money, I've never found that amount of money ever transferred between a foreign government and the children of a sitting American politician who is at the highest levels of American diplomacy.
So while we're having this dog and pony show on Capitol Hill, the real corruption is going completely unnoticed, unchecked, and untalked about.
Yes.
And that's the way it's all a charade. It's all a charade. He goes.
Well, it's how a member of Congress goes into Congress with, an average amount of money and comes out a multimillionaire.
Yes, exactly right.
And even if they're not doing it directly through their adult children, they're doing it through investment funds.
Yes, exactly. So he goes on to talk about, and it's been going on a long, long time too, like as you've pointed out. But he goes on to talk about Obama's smash and grab technique.
There's another form of corruption that we call smash and grab in the book. And this involves close friends of Barack Obama and investment deals that they make that sort of follow in the wake of major regulatory decisions that President Obama does. So, for example, there is Barack Obama's best friend, a guy who he's known for a long time, who sets up this entity called Vistria Partners. His name is Marty Nesbitt, and he follows in the wake of some things that Barack Obama does. The University of Phoenix, which is a for-profit school that's very popular with people in the active duty military and others. Barack Obama says, we don't like this school. We don't think it's serving students well. We're going to suspend the Pentagon from using GI Bill dollars to allow soldiers to go to this school. Well, you can imagine, Perry, what happens immediately. The stock price of this for-profit school goes from about $100 a share down to $3 a share. Well, at this point, guess who steps in to buy up this company? That would be his best friend, Marty Nesbitt. Marty Nesbitt comes in, buys the University of Phoenix, and then lo and behold, the Obama administration reverses course and says, we don't think it's too bad what the school's doing. We're going to allow GI Bill dollars to flow back to this school. And you can imagine what the valuations did at the University of Phoenix after that fact. That's just one example of many, including the coal industry, payday lenders, you name it, where people closely affiliated with Barack Obama follow in the wake. He smashes the company. They buy it up on, pennies on the dollar, only to see those valuations rise later on.
This is nothing short than mafia type of tactics that are being employed by the administration. Where's the impeachment inquiry? Where was the impeachment inquiry for Barack Obama?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amazing how they just don't see things when it's their side, huh?
Yeah.
But I saw that same thing. I didn't have the name for it, smash and grab, but I've called it regulatory racketeering.
Yes. That's another
where
good
they implement some regulation, puts the business out of business, the value drops, and then somebody buys it up, and then the regulation goes away.
Yeah, and you were talking earlier that this whole thing is a bipartisan issue. Well, let's talk about the man of the hour that's going to be coming up in these impeachment hearings, Mr. Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell.
Mm-hmm.
Mitch McConnell over there in the Senate, he's as dirty as the day is long, too, because he's married to Elaine Chao, who has dealings with communist China.
I want to come back to Mitch McConnell. I mean, he is the majority leader in the Senate. He could make or break the president's agenda. How sold out is this guy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very serious problem. So Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, is married to Elaine Chao, who is the Transportation Secretary in the Trump administration. They got married in the early 1990s. Her family at that time was a very small player in the shipping business. Well, in 1993, Senator Mitch McConnell goes to Beijing, China with his father-in-law, James Chao, and they are there not as part of an official congressional trip. They are there as guests of the China State Shipbuilding Corporation, which is, as the name implied, owned by the Chinese government. And it's also, by the way, one of the largest military contractors in Beijing. And they basically strike a bargain with the McConnell-Chao family. They say, guess what? We will build a bunch of ships for you. We will finance the construction of those ships. We'll provide crews for those ships, and we'll provide contracts so that you can ship goods from other Chinese government entities around the globe, and you can make a lot of money doing it. Essentially, they take the deal, and for the past 25 years, they have made an enormous amount of money, and they've been very close to the Chinese government. So you have this very strange situation where the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, and Elaine Chao, his wife, who's now in the cabinet of the Trump administration, her sister and father actually sat on the board of directors of the China State Shipbuilding Corporation Holdings, which is a major defense contractor. I don't think there's ever been anything quite like that. This by itself is troubling enough, Perry, but when you match that growing commercial relationship with Mitch McConnell's voting record as it relates to China, guess what? He's gotten progressively softer over the years to the point where in the early 90s, he was very critical of China on human rights. He was very frustrated with their attitudes on trade and currency and their military expansionism. Today, he is far more muted on those issues and actually has been very aggressive in resisting bipartisan efforts in Congress to even investigate whether China is manipulating its currency.
So there you go.
Well, and Mitch McConnell, I think it was the year 1997 when Hong Kong was supposed to be turned back over to the Chinese. Well, in 1992, whatever year it was, but in 1992, Mitch McConnell authored a piece of legislation called the U.S. Hong Kong Policy Act, which outlined or detailed what our policy was going to be towards Hong Kong after the takeover of the communist Chinese. And basically, it said, we're going to continue to treat Hong Kong as a separate entity.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting now that we're seeing all these protesters over there. And I'm very suspicious of the uprising that's taking place. It almost seems like it's designed, and this is just my opinion, my observation, but it seems like it's designed to provoke a reaction from police so that they can turn around and use that against China. And bear in mind, I'm no fan of China. But I do know that China was mentioned in that PNAC report for regime change a long time ago. You remember the PNAC report, the Project for the New American Century, which Rumsfeld and Cheney and all of them neocons, all of the neocons were a part of. They named China as for regime change, and certainly we're no fan of the regime change. But why would we be building them up? I guess this is the problem I have with all of this stuff. It seems like we build them up. We build our own enemies so that we can later on have war with them. And that seems to be the model that's taking place over and over again.
Well, I think it's the UN. They're trying to put all of the nations of the world under the UN system.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's a repeating pattern over and over again. But I just don't think it's going to work with China.
Well, they've certainly...
Their country is thousands of years old. I mean, they're not... And they're very, very smart people.
Yeah, they are very smart. And they're very adept to stealing things, as we'll see in just a moment. But first, there's more on Elaine Chao here.
Well, she's had several positions. So in the Reagan administration, she was on the Federal Maritime Commission. Then in the George W. Bush administration, she was Secretary of Labor. And yes, this relationship goes all the way through. And in fact, if you look at her tenure as the Secretary of Labor, she is not critical at all on China as it relates to labor rights. In fact, there are federal dollars, taxpayer dollars, that flow to China in her function at the Labor Department that is sort of highly unusual. So this is a long-time relationship. Neither Mitch McConnell nor Elaine Chao have been critical of China on human rights or on these other issues. And in fact, I quote in the book on several interviews that Elaine Chao has done in the Chinese language that we translated, where she's basically poo-pooing of China as a threat to the United States in any way. Even though the Pentagon and the military is pretty clear of what Beijing's intentions are. Essentially, China is going to try to surpass the U.S. Navy in military capability by 2030. Well, and yet you've got these decision leaders that don't want to talk about any of that and want to poo-poo it because, I would argue, of their commercial ties with the government of Beijing.
Now, one thing that's interesting about this whole scenario is that Trump is looking to do a trade deal with China. And then this should worry everybody because, as Peter Schweizer says that any offers from China are likely to, any offers for the trade deal, anyway, you can have strings attached. They're offers of quid pro quos that come with certain deals. So this is one thing that's a real concern, is that could Trump go soft on China if they agree to make some kind of business deal? It could be real estate. It could be any other thing. And that would be a real quid pro quo for which he could potentially be impeached. But I would venture to say that one would probably be ignored if it fits the agenda.
Probably because the policy of the United States has been to do all of these trade deals, and since 1973, whenever they started the round, they've included things that are non-tariff related. Well, the non-tariff related issues that they've negotiated on has helped to build an international system of law and commerce.
Yeah,
exactly.
So
they would. I hope that he never does. What we should be doing with China, countries actually, is gradually extricating ourselves from those agreements.
Yeah. Well, the founders warned us about foreign entanglements, and here we are with foreign entanglements. Now, I got one more clip from the Secret Empires interview, which was just excellent, by the way. And so here it is.
There was a couple of years ago, the head of the Canadian Intelligence Service warned members of Parliament that the Chinese government was going to offer deals to politicians. And we've seen this in Australia, and we've seen this now with Mitch McConnell and with Joe Biden. That their families have these lucrative deals with Beijing, and I think it affects their decision-making. The Chinese, I quote them in Secret Empires, they explicitly say that they're very concerned about Donald Trump. As my 17-year-old daughter would say, Beijing is freaked out by Donald Trump, and they want to get him to soften his positions on a whole host of issues. The way they are going to do this, they say, is by offering sweetheart deals to his kids. And so my message in the book is very clear. I haven't seen any deals consummated yet. But my message to them is do not take these deals. It's bad for the country. It will be exposed, and there are always strings attached. They are not going to give you a sweetheart deal unless they are expecting something in return. So I think this is the next wave, and we need to be watching this closely because this is how China hopes to hamstring President Trump and to get him to soften his position on China.
It's interesting that We've talked before about this broadcast. Well, earlier we were talking about how Trump's kids have been pushing the EB-5 visa program. It makes you wonder what they have to gain by doing so.
Well, it was the EB-5 visa program that they were trying to use in Meridian, Idaho, and they were going after communist Chinese money.
Yeah.
The EB-5 visa program is a way for local people to go out and get money from foreigners, and what the foreigners can get in return for that we do know of for sure is that they can get citizenship.
Permanent residency, yeah. Ultimately,
so they're basically buying citizenship.
Yes, America is for sale. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And if you want to get spies in here, what better way to do it?
Yeah, that's the way the whole system is working. The whole global system is corrupt from beginning to end. I mean, it's just rotten to the core.
Yeah. Yeah. And, he talked about Jared Kushner in here as well. I know we have a caller on the line, but he talks about Jared Kushner because it isn't just the Chinese we have to worry about. We focus a lot on the Chinese, but it's all foreign influence. As far as Jared Kushner is concerned.
Because it's a global system. It works the same for all countries.
Yeah. I've mentioned before Jared Kushner's tight relationship with Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu. And because of that tight relationship, I believe, is why you have Trump being so pro-Zionist and giving Syria's land, which is the Golan Heights, over to Israel, where he doesn't have the authority to give it away, but he did it as a part of official U.S. policy. And you have the Genie Energy, which Jared Kushner is tied to. He brought an official from Genie Energy into the White House to vet some of Trump's cabinet officials.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Genie Energy's been given exclusive drilling rights to the oil and gas in the Golan Heights. And then we had a situation just this past week where the Trump administration came out. I think I got the audio from Mike Pompeo, which maybe we'll play later on in the show, about how now it's the official U.S. policy. They've softened the stance on Israeli settlements. So this is a problem. And these are the real quid pro quos that don't really get talked about. All right, I want to go ahead and take the call here. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hey, guys, this is Art.
Hey, Art.
You're talking about evidence and hearsay. I just want to share with people there was a traditional objection to hearsay evidence stated by renowned Chancellor Kent. And we're talking about James Kent, who was an American jurist, legal scholar, author of the Commentaries on American Law. He was born in 1763, died in 1847, so this is nothing new. This is actually established law. In the case of Sophianopolis v. McCormick, Supra at 583, quote, "A person who relates a hearsay is not obliged to enter into any particulars, to answer any questions, to solve any difficulties, to reconcile any contradiction, to explain any obscurities, to remove any ambiguities. He entrenches himself in the simple assertion that he was told so and leaves the burden entirely on his dead or absent author. In American law, hearsay is an out-of-court statement or action offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted, and such statements are generally inadmissible under the Federal Rule of Evidence. And under the Federal Rule of Evidence 801, a statement or statements made by persons, oral assertion, written assertion, or nonverbal conduct. There are 9 types of evidence. Every one of them, whether it be documentary, digital, demonstrative, exculpatory, inculpatory, physical, prima facie, scientific, or testimony, all must be first hand and direct.
There you go. Very good.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, that's
Thank
that.
You
Can you got a link to that information so I can put it in the show notes?
No, this comes from 30-something years of studying, but you can look up the case of Sophianopolis v. McCormick, and I'll drop the link to that in the chat room.
Excellent.
You can go look that for yourself, but everything else just comes from years of studying law and research.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Quite welcome.
All right. Have a good day. There he is, Art, off the grid, and I'm glad he's on the grid today because that was a good call.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so we're talking about Genie Energy. We're talking about whether hearsay evidence is in the court, this whole kangaroo process that's going on in Capitol Hill. But, Genie Energy is something people need to be paying attention to. I've got their strategic advisory board, Vicky, which I saved from their website because they took it down because it was starting to get too much attention. But you've got people on their strategic advisory board, people like Michael Steinhardt. Okay, fine. He was the founder of Steinhardt, Fine, and Berkowitz and Company.
Isn't he an FBI agent?
I don't know. It doesn't say that here. But they say he's a noted Wall Street investor and principal manager.
Okay.
But then you got people like Dick Cheney, 46th Vice President of the United States. He also served as, CEO of Halliburton, which we know that, and U.S. Secretary of Defense from 1989 to 1993. Then we have U.S. Senator Mary Landrieu from Louisiana. She was senator from 96 to 2014. She's on the Strategic Advisory Board, and she passed the U.S.-Israel Energy Cooperation Bill. The bill fosters partnerships, they say, focused on developing resources such as natural gas and alternative fuels on the academic, business, and governmental levels. Then you have, Rupert Murdoch, which is why you will not hear this information anywhere else except in the alternative media. Fox News is compromised, people. Surprise, surprise, huh? Rupert Murdoch is the founder and executive chairman of News Corporation, one of the world's largest diversified media companies. News Corporation's holdings include Fox Entertainment, which I think was actually sold. I think Fox Entertainment was sold, but Fox News wasn't. He still owns that. Then they say Dow Jones and Company, the New York Post, HarperCollins, and significant media assets on 6 continents. Then you have Bill Richardson, governor of New Mexico from 2003 to 2011. Bill Richardson served as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations from 97 to 98, energy secretary in the Clinton administration from 98 to 2001, chairman of the 2004 Democratic National Convention, and chairman of the Democratic Governors Association. Then, as I said before, Jacob Rothschild, chairman of the J. Rothschild Group of Companies and of RIT Capital Partners, PLC. Chairman of 5 Arrows Limited, Lord Rothschild is a noted philanthropist. Hey, he's very generous, Vicky. And he's chairman of the Rothschild Foundation. As I said before, he's also very closely associated, and they don't say that here, I'm saying it, with Mikhail Khodorkovsky. It was Jacob Rothschild that when Mikhail Khodorkovsky went to prison in Russia, he gave all of his shares of Yukos Oil to Jacob Rothschild. That's how close they are, because he couldn't hold on to his shares. Yukos Oil was Russia's largest oil company, which was being looted during that period in the Soviet era, after the Soviet era collapsed, after the Soviet Union collapsed, when all of these predator capitalists went in to prey upon the resources for pennies on the ruble through this corrupt voucher program, which was administered by Boris Yeltsin and Natalie Chubais. So you got Jacob Rothschild on the board of directors, Strategic Advisory Board of Genie Energy. Then you have Dr. Larry Summers, and I know you know who he is, Vicky.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Dr. Larry Summers. He's the Charles W. Eliot University Professor and President Emeritus at Harvard University. Dr. Summers served as the 71st Secretary-Treasurer under President Clinton and as Director of National Economic Council for President Obama. He was also had some affiliation with the World Bank, as I recall. And rounding out the list, is former CIA Director of Central Intelligence, James Woolsey. He was Director of Central Intelligence from 93 to 95, and as Undersecretary of the Navy from 77 to 79. He is the co-founder of the United States Energy Security Council and is chairman of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And whenever they talk about defending democracies, by the way, that means destroying them. Just so people understand the lingo.
I heard somebody speculating that Woolsey was head or involved with the Galen network. Now, I haven't researched that, but my impression from what was being said was that the Galen network were the Nazis who bailed out of Germany as Germany was collapsing before they surrendered. I mean, they moved, and their issue, what they were involved in, was energy, apparently.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's something I intend to look more into, but I'm just saying it now, in case anybody wants to
do
go
research
out there
and dig.
Look at it.
Yeah, and folks, here's the thing. We talk about documenting the crisis of our republic. That's what we do here every week, and this is why you need to tell your friends, your neighbors, everyone you know about Govern America. We don't speculate. We don't deal with conjecture here. We don't talk about UFOs and little green men, and we talk about stuff you can prove. We play audio from the think tanks. We talk about provable stuff. We deal with provable documentation every single week. Because if you deal with the proof, there's no reason to speculate. There's no reason to conjecture. The criminality is right there in your face. Hour number 3 of Govern America straight ahead, right after the break. Stay with us.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
The councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
And we're live here as we continue on here on this 23rd of November, 2019 at 1:01 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're listening there, we are live. If you're listening some other time, we are not live. Anyway, Vicky Davis is here. I'm Darren Weeks as we continue on here. GovernAmerica.com is the website for the show, governamerica.com, and also check out Vicky's websites, thetechnocratictyranny.com, thetechnocratictyranny.com, and channelingreality.com. And we certainly do need some reality, as we have a lot of nutcases today that like to believe fiction over fact, speculation and conjecture, and hearsay over reality. Speaking of reality, I don't know if you have anything you want to say before we go on, but we were talking earlier about the communist Chinese. I wanted to come back to that. I mentioned at the beginning of the show that we just learned yesterday that there was a spy that was arrested. I guess he was arrested last year. He was convicted yesterday. They don't really know the degree to which the damage that this guy has done. But I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say before we get into that.
No, I'm anxious to hear that story because I hadn't heard about it.
Well, his name is Jerry Chun Shin Lee. As I said, he's a man accused of being a Chinese spy. He was just convicted yesterday. According to news reports, the FBI found on his possession classified information, highly classified, including the identities of agents on the ground in China. He apparently admitted to at least part of it. He admitted to meeting with certain Chinese people. He deposited $17,000 into a bank account, which they thought was suspicious because he was at the time operating a failing business, apparently. Anyway, there is a partial report here from NBC.
Conceded they couldn't prove the money came from China and didn't know how many secrets Lee actually revealed in return. But federal judge T.S. Ellis said it was likely at least some of the money came from the Chinese, so Lee must have given them something of value. And former U.S. intelligence officials agree.
That's a devastating loss that takes years and perhaps decades to recover from.
The sentence, 19 years in prison. Jerry Lee is now the third U.S. intelligence official convicted in just the past year of spying for China.
The third spy that was convicted in the last year, Vicky.
Yeah, I have to say that the FBI really, it seems like they have been unleashed to
go after these people.
To go after people for corruption. There's a young guy named Kip Simpson that I listen to his channel because he's covering all of these local politicians that are being arrested for corrupt practices.
Well, this is the kind of work that the FBI should be doing, but
yes.
We know that the FBI was doing a lot of things to set up terrorism, attacking mentally ill people, basically. I once made the comment on this broadcast that it's a war on mentally ill people because the FBI has went after a lot of mentally ill people, taking them by the hand, walking them through certain terroristic activities, and then arresting them for being terrorists when in many of these cases, had they been left alone, they probably wouldn't have done anything. They wouldn't have had the wherewithal or the knowledge. But when you take somebody, as it was being done, it was just so bad that there's a TED Talk that was dedicated to that reality, which we played bits and pieces of it on the air. In fact, I think it's in the rotation on the stream. When we're not on the air, there's programming on the stream on Government America Radio. We have that in the rotation, this TED Talk that this gentleman gave. Because it's monumental. When it's so bad that they're doing TED Talks on the subject, I mean, TED Talks isn't exactly the realm generally of conspiracy theorists. People might try to dismiss us as conspiracy nuts. We're not, but they may try to dismiss us as that. But when they're doing TED Talks on the subject, so the point of the matter is that the FBI can be a useful tool if it's really going after genuine crime. The problem is, like so many of these other agencies, it has been highly politicized and is being used as a tool.
Yeah,
it's really sad to see.
And let me just make this comment. I don't know if this is the case or not, but it could have something to do with it. Our government, since we've moved to central planning and the Office of Management and Budget, that puts them pretty much in charge of everything. They could potentially could have been squeezing the FBI, saying justify your existence. And if that's the case, if that's why they were doing that sort of thing, then obviously it would be a corrupt practice, but I could understand it given that their survival depended on it.
Well, it's partially is the case. We know a third of their budget goes to, is allocated to fight terrorism. It might even be more than that now. That's an old number. I've been quoting that number for a while. It might even be more than that. But if there is no terrorism, then what are we spending all this money for?
Yeah, well, that's true. But that is one of the points of convergence at the international level. Mm-hmm. Combating international terrorism, combating international drug trafficking. That's where they began merging the across borders, creating a global system. So if you're creating a global system, by definition, it's in conflict with a domestic system, right?
Uh-huh.
Especially since at the global level, they're operating under not American law. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah. Well,
so
go ahead.
It's all very complex, and in order to judge something like that, you really have to look inside the agency and find out what was being done, what were the mandates being put on the agency itself.
Yeah.
Internally, which we never see. And
that's the problem, is how do you get to the bottom of all of it? You know, when you're not privy to what's really going on inside the agency. Here's, on this spy bust, here's a report from Fox News from last year when the guy was first arrested. They were talking about this. And
where did he work? I didn't hear you say where he worked. He's a CIA agent. He's from within the CIA. He's one of their own. Go. That goes to exactly.
Yeah, and that's what they said earlier. Is they said that this is like the third guy in the last year or year and a half that they arrested.
Okay, all right.
For espionage. So for Chinese espionage. So this is why it's so alarming. And as you're going to hear from this Fox News report, under the Obama administration, they determined that their complete insight into what's going on in the Chinese on the ground dried up. And they think, the speculation is, it could be because of this guy.
An ex-CIA officer arrested, suspected of spying for China. All rise. Judge Napolitano is here. Give me more on this, please. What's he allegedly done?
Well, he is arrested for possessing materials that he should have surrendered when he left the CIA in 2007. And the materials are highly, highly classified. They're ranked the upper level of top secret, and they contain names, addresses, and contact information of human intelligence presently or formerly on the ground in China. The reason I say formerly is because at least one of these people has been killed. That's the basis for the arrest. The information took place. Listen to this. The FBI had search warrants and went through his luggage in 2 different hotels, one in Honolulu and one in Alexandria, Virginia. And this trained in deception CIA agent, former agent, did not know it. So the purpose, the stated reason for the arrest is the possession of this material. But the real thing that they're after is whether or not he actually passed this on to the Chinese government, because American intel, live human intel on the ground in China, almost completely dried up in the last 2 years of the Obama administration. Almost totally dark. And now the government is wondering, is this because there was a spy among us? Is this because one of our own people helped identify our intel assets on the ground to the Chinese government, which summarily executed them? Summarily, not a trial, just summarily executed them.
That is a huge loss of intelligence on the ground.
Yes. Now, the government does not know what names he revealed. The government may know, but hasn't stated yet. The government does not know with whom he may have collaborated.
Okay.
And as I said, the initial charge is the wrongful possession of these documents. That's just the instrument to get him arrested. Now he's in custody, and they'll develop more of a case against him.
What are the implications of the fact that the man arrested, the former CIA guy, is an Asian American of Chinese ethnicity? Implications?
Very bad implications for the absolute need of American intelligence for Asian Americans to be part of the team, to trust the team, to work for the team, to be able to recruit people who look and sound like they are and walk among Chinese government corridors and provide information back to us. It's very, very bad. It's good that he was caught, but the damage could have been, we don't know yet, catastrophic.
Got it.
In terms of the loss of human life and the loss of the information those people would have provided.
Okay, I want to again stress that report was actually from 2018 when the guy was first arrested, And now we know that, Judge Napolitano said in that report that they're going to build a case against him. We already know that he's been convicted yesterday. So it's the
I'd
information.
like to build a case against Judge Napolitano.
Yeah, and I don't like Judge Napolitano, but what he was saying in that report I thought was important. So that's why I shared.
That's the problem. That's the problem with our government, is that our government is totally infiltrated with foreigners, and they can't. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? We don't know. What we do know is that there is an internal war within our government.
Absolutely.
There are communists within our government, and they are causing all kinds of problems. And so to suggest that we need more of it, I think is really wrong-headed.
Well, there are intelligence operatives who are working to take down.
But they should be outside. They should be the assets that American intelligence are working with. I mean, there shouldn't be a potential conflict of interest.
Absolutely.
And China is so people are terrified of the Chinese government. They're even afraid to say things against the government that are unrelated to anything, because they might get killed for doing it. You can't criticize the Chinese government. So that says how strict that government is and how dangerous it is.
Yeah, and the last thing you want is U.S. politicians here in the United States compromised to the point where they're willing to bend foreign policy or even domestic policy in some cases to favor the communist Chinese government. It's just crazy. But here we have, and again, it's not just China; it's other countries as well. When you can have them on the take, here we have Benjamin Netanyahu, who was just indicted for corruption himself. Here's a CBC report.
A sad day for the people of Israel. Those were the words of the Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit as he announced criminal charges against Benjamin Netanyahu: bribery, breach of trust, and fraud. It is the first time an Israeli prime minister has been indicted while in office, even if only in a temporary capacity. Netanyahu has tried and failed twice over the past year to form a government, but he's also Israel's longest-serving prime minister, and he came out fighting tonight. We are witnessing an attempted coup against a serving prime minister, he's saying, based on fabrications. The indictments have been hanging over Netanyahu for some time now.
There has been so many speculations in the past that it makes you think that there has to be something there.
But Netanyahu, Bibi, to most Israelis, has his supporters too.
I think that Netanyahu is the strongest figure that Israel's ever had on the world stage.
That's certainly the image he likes to promote. His friendship with the U.S. President, Donald Trump, paying dividends this week when Washington removed its objections to Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories considered illegal under international law. In an interview in September during the last election, analyst Reuven Hazan said the friendship was key for many voters.
It makes the people who vote security think that we have a world-class leader who is delivering. So if he's corrupt, still, it's a worthy bargain.
But many Israelis, too, are worried about the state of their democracy, and it explains the stalemate in politics right now. Netanyahu has been unable to form a government, but neither has the opposition Blue and White Party. The only certainty in Israel right now is that Netanyahu will not leave without a fight. There is no legal requirement that he stand down unless he's found guilty. Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
Okay, so they mentioned in that report, as I mentioned earlier, about the U.S. changing their stance on Israeli settlements. And based upon what we've already heard, regarding softening government officials' positions through bribery and blackmail, what might have brought this change? How much money is Jared Kushner getting from Israeli deals?
Well, it seems to me like a lot better case against Trump using Israel than they're getting out of this Ukraine story.
The whole Ukraine story is just a dog and pony show. It's smoke and mirrors. There's nothing there. Yeah. Nothing of substance whatsoever. It's a political event designed to make everything look like he's corrupt. I really believe it's genuinely designed to overthrow the election. They don't want him reelected. But when it comes to real corruption, there's too many of them that have their hands in the cookie jar, so to speak, to go after real corruption. That's my take on the whole situation. Here's Mike Pompeo talking about the Israeli settlement.
The Trump administration is reversing the Obama administration's approach towards Israeli settlements. U.S. public statements on settlement activities in the West Bank have been inconsistent over decades. In 1978, the Carter administration categorically concluded that Israel's establishment of civilian settlements was inconsistent with international law. However, in 1981, President Reagan disagreed with that conclusion and stated that he didn't believe that the settlements were inherently illegal. Subsequent administrations recognized that unrestrained settlement activity could be an obstacle to peace, but they wisely and prudently recognized that dwelling on legal positions didn't advance peace. However, in December 2016, at the very end of the previous administration, Secretary Kerry changed decades of this careful, bipartisan approach by publicly reaffirming the supposed illegality of settlements. After carefully studying all sides of the legal debate, this administration agrees with President Reagan. The establishment of Israeli civilian settlements in the West Bank is not, per se, inconsistent with international law.
So there you go.
That's ridiculous. They should pick our government should pick, a side and stick with it, because flip-flopping from administration to administration isn't fair to anybody.
Well,
I wish our government would just focus on our country.
Yeah, why do we have to pick a side? Let them fight it out. That's what I say.
Well, that's the ultimate is to actually have our government care about our country.
Oh, imagine that.
But it seems that our foreign policy has taken over our government, and they're all focused outward and upward and don't really pay attention to our country.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to get to this event in the interest of time. William Barr was at the Federalist Society. It's a very good presentation. And I don't like William Barr either, by the way. This is a guy that after the Randy Weaver incident, Ruby Ridge, took place, the FBI snipers shot Randy Weaver's wife while she was holding a baby. And killed her. She shot her in the head, and this William Barr represented the snipers pro bono and got them off. So
yeah, that's really disgusting.
I don't like William Barr at all, but he did do a good presentation on the subject of the erosion of presidential or executive power, which was really interesting, because quite honestly, I looked at it as the opposite way. I looked at it as Congress abrogating their responsibility to legislate and empowering the presidency, empowering the executive branch, because they've added all these bureaucratic agencies. But this is really, they do it in order that, they can control the whole process. The president has the authority as long as the president's going along with the agenda of the deep state and the intelligentsia and the shadow government that's really running our country. As we've seen with Trump, and it sounds like I'm big-time Trump, I got to say again, I don't think there's really anything Trump has done much to get reelected. I'm just going to put that right out there, because he's thrown his base under the bus on most of the things he's run on, including foreign policy. He's continued to meddle, despite the fact that he ran on getting us out of many of these regime change wars. The foreign policy is still intact. He bombed Syria. He tried to pick a fight with Bolton in there. He tried to pick a fight with Venezuela. That's kind of died down now some. But we, and even he ran on dealing with Iran and pulling us out of the nuclear agreement, which I think is a big mistake. That's just my opinion. Others can disagree with me. I didn't like the nuclear agreement to begin with, but once we're in it, for our credibility's sake, and everybody was saying it was working, for our credibility's sake, though, as a nation, we should not be yanking us out unless we had a real good reason to do so. And I just couldn't see any real good reason to yank us out of that. The point is, though, is that there's very little I've seen, that Trump has given his base that would make us want to reelect him. But he has gone up against the intelligence establishment. He has and continues to go up against the deep state in many respects. It's clear they don't want him for some reason, and I think probably it's because he's such a loose cannon. He's hard to control. He's hard to predict. He is smart enough to actually have a brain in his head to think for himself and sometimes look outside of the information flow that he's getting from his quote-unquote official advisors. And that makes him dangerous. And that's why they're flipping out. Anyway, William Barr at the Federalist Society, and he's worried about the erosion of executive power and provides some historical context.
I'm concerned that the deck has become stacked against the executive, and that since the mid-'60s there's been a steady grinding down of the executive branch's authority that accelerated after Watergate. More and more, the president's ability to act in areas in which he has discretion has become smothered by the encroachments of the other branches. When these disputes arise, I think there are two aspects of contemporary thought, sort of conventional wisdom, that tend to operate to the disadvantage of the executive. The first is this notion that politics in a free republic is all about the people's branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, protecting liberty by imposing restrictions on the executive. The premise is that the greatest danger of government becoming oppressive is from the executive and the prospect of executive excess. So that there's this knee-jerk tendency to see the legislative and judicial branches as the good guys protecting the people from a rapacious would-be autocrat. This prejudice is wrong-headed and atavistic. It comes out of the English Whig view of politics and English constitutional experience, where political evolution was precisely that. You started out with the king having all the cards. He holds all power, including legislative and judicial. And political evolution involved a process by which the legislative power gradually, over hundreds of years, reined in the king and extracted and established its own powers, as well as the powers of the judiciary. And certainly a watershed in this evolution was the Glorious Revolution of 1689. But by 1787, we had the exact opposite model in the United States. The founders greatly admired how the British Constitution had given rise to principles of balanced government, but they felt that the British Constitution had achieved only an imperfect form of this model. They saw themselves as framing a more perfect version of separation of powers and a balanced constitution. And part of their more perfect construction was a new kind of executive. They created an office that already was the ideal Whig executive. It already had built into it the limitations that Whig doctrine had aspired to for centuries. It did not have the power to tax and spend. It was subject to the writ of habeas corpus. It was bound by due process in enforcing the laws against members of the body politic. It was elected for a limited term of office, and it was elected by the nation as a whole. That is a remarkable democratic institution, the only figure selected by the nation as a whole. And with the creation of the American presidency, the Whigs' obsessive focus on the dangers of monarchical rule lost relevance.
Okay, so he's kind of long-winded, and he takes a while to get to his point. That's why it's kind of hard to edit and cut these things down. I think I want to cut to the chase, Vicky, because there's other things I want to, get to, and I see we're running quickly out of time. It seems like we always have that. Time's always our enemy on this program. But he applies this erosion to executive power to the Trump presidency, where perfectly legitimate functions of the office of the executive were undermined by the other branches, most notably the increasing encroachment of the judicial branch upon executive power. Now, this clip is a little bit longer, but I'm going to skip a couple of others so that I can play this one, because I think it's very important what he's saying here.
In recent years, the judiciary has been steadily encroaching on executive responsibilities in a way that has substantially undercut the functioning of the presidency. And the courts have done this in essentially two ways. First, the judiciary has appointed itself the ultimate arbiter of separation of powers disputes between Congress and the executive, thus preempting the political process, which the framers conceived of as the primary check on interbranch rivalry. And second, the judiciary has usurped presidential authority for itself under the rubric of review, substituting its judgment for the executive in areas committed to the president's discretion, or by assuming direct control over realms of decision-making that heretofore have been considered at the core of presidential power. The framers did not envision that the courts would play the role of arbiter of turf disputes between the political branches. As Madison explained in Federalist 51, the great security against the gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. Ambition will be made to counteract ambition. And by giving each, the Congress and the presidency, the tools to fend off the encroachment of the others, the framers believed this would force compromise and political accommodation. The constitutional means to resist encroachment that Madison describes takes many forms. As Justice Scalia observed, the Constitution gives Congress and the President many clubs with which to beat each other. Conspicuously absent from the list is running to the courts to have them resolve the disputes. And that omission makes sense. When the judiciary purports to pronounce a conclusive resolution to constitutional disputes between the political branches, it does not act as a co-equal. And if the political branches believe the courts will resolve their constitutional disputes, they have no incentive to debate their differences through the democratic process with input and accountability to the people, and they will not even try to make the hard choices necessary to forge a compromise. The long experience of our country is that the political branches can work out their constitutional differences without resort to the courts. In any event, the prospect that the courts can meaningfully resolve interbranch disputes about the meaning of the Constitution is mostly a false promise. Apart from this, their overzealous role in interbranch disputes, the courts have increasingly engaged directly in the usurpation of presidential decision-making. Courts are now willing, under the banner of judicial review, to substitute their judgment for the president on matters that only a few decades decades ago would have been unimaginable, such as matters directly involving national security and foreign affairs. The travel ban case is a good example. There, the president, as you all know, made a decision under an explicit legislative grant of authority in black and white that he had the authority, as well as his long-recognized constitutional national security role, to temporarily suspend entry to aliens coming from a half-dozen countries pending adoption of more effective vetting procedures. The common denominator of the initial countries selected was that they were unquestionably hubs of terrorist activity. But despite the fact that there were clearly justifiable security grounds for the measure, the district court in Hawaii and the Ninth Circuit blocked this public safety measure for a year and a half. The theory was that the president's motive for the order was religious bias against Muslims. This was just the first of many immigration measures based on good and sufficient security grounds that the courts have second-guessed since the beginning of the Trump administration.
So the bottom line is, with all of this, is that our government has become so dysfunctional. How long can this continue before the whole thing just absolutely disintegrates? You know, we've seen how badly it's gotten under the Trump administration. And if he gets reelected, which I think probably at this point he will, unless they can rig the game to the point where it's so far out of kilter. I mean, I think with the impeachment situation, it's ultimately going to backfire to the point where, I mean, he's going to garner support. I think he already has. But there's a good chance he's going to get reelected. They can't seem to have a decent, sane contender for the presidency on the Democratic ticket. And since no other party's really given any serious consideration, here we have Trump being the front runner of everything. I mean, and so if he gets reelected, what happens then? As this war continues for another 4 years or however long, I'm honestly concerned he can be assassinated in his second term if he gets elected, because that's how desperate they are. And that's not to say the guy's an angel, because I don't think he is. I think Trump has really stabbed all of us in the back. That's what's so odd about all of this stuff, is that I find myself having to defend a guy that I really don't want to defend. I'm not a fan. But at the same time, I see what's happening here, and if you look at it objectively, you got to realize that this is nothing short of a coup d'etat.
Right, and the continued existence of our country is the most important thing to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't care what Trump says on a phone call. I don't care about any of that stuff. I want the United States to continue as a sovereign nation. I don't want it to be part of a union. The reason why I supported Trump is because he said he would get us out of NAFTA.
Yeah,
and he didn't. He just renegotiated it. And he's talking about, he mentioned TPP. He said he wasn't going to go for it, and then he said, well, maybe I will.
Yeah, he killed it, and now he's talking about bringing
China.
it back.
I mean,
yeah. And the last thing we need is a NAFTA for China. A free trade agreement for the communist Chinese, which, all these trade agreements, we're not just talking about moving products and services here.
Right, they're not about trade. I mean,
they're
that's
about
the most
moving people.
Thing everybody needs to understand. They are not about commerce.
And I've got nothing against the Chinese people per se, but when you have communist Chinese being brought in here, and you don't know who they are, and most of them have family back home that can be threatened if they don't cooperate with the Chinese government, and there is the problem. They're controlled. They're puppets being pulled on the string by the Communist Party in China. That's the issue. It isn't a race issue, as some would accuse you of saying. You can't say anything about anything unless you're a racist. Well, that's bullcrap.
Yeah.
And a case in point here, you had a certain thing in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, that developed. This is an interesting art project. You want to talk a little bit about that? I got a little clip from the city council there when you get done.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is really funny.
It's scary is what it is.
Well, it is scary because there's a lot of economic development, which economic development is the Trojan horse. It's the global Trojan horse. But up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, it was discovered that a sign, or I don't know if you'd call it a sign or not.
It's like a little pillar. It's like a pillar there.
Yeah, a pillar that has symbols on it. There's 4 sides to it. It has symbols on it. And on one side of it is a hammer and sickle. And a friend of mine took a video of it, and the video was brilliant. He used Google Earth, and while he was zeroing in down, from up in space
zooming in
to the town, he's playing the Russian anthem. And then he ends up showing this sign, with the hammer and sickle. Well, the whole community, I guess, just went nuts. And a local newspaper reporter wrote an article about it. And
that's the West, where people still have a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
If that had happened on the East Coast or the far West Coast, where you have this heavy concentrations of little commies running around, they would say, well, what's the problem? You're the problem. They'd run you out of town on the rail.
Right.
So I guess they finally got the thing taken down, right?
Yeah, they did. They took it down. Apparently the mayor was forced to say this is inappropriate for city art.
Well, see, and here's the thing. I got no problem with the hammer and sickle or the Nazi swastika or anything being displayed publicly as long as it's done in the proper context. I mean, if you're talking about if it's a historical exhibit where you're talking about how bad communism is, then fine, display it. But when you're promoting these things as being a legitimate form of government or of a legitimate party, there's a problem, and the community should rise up against it. Because do we have to explain communism? Do we have to explain the hammer and sickle from a historical concept? Here's the audio from the city council meeting where they're just bemoaning, oh, I can't believe why would people be so mad about this?
I want to personally address the controversy that we have had on the art situation in Coeur d'Alene. We have in the city of Coeur d'Alene a tremendous art program, something that we can be very proud of. We have wonderful, great volunteers that put in their time and effort to create a great arts program, of which we have in the city of Coeur d'Alene. And I want to thank each and every one of them. And I'm saddened to hear of some of the criticism that the members of our Arts Commission have taken. So I want to apologize to each and every one of those people. I can't believe in this day and age where we can't have differences of opinion and do it in a civil manner. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's everywhere. It's throughout our whole country. And it's really, really sad. So the note that I want to make is that our Arts Commission operates under guidelines. And they operate under guidelines that are set forth by mayor and they're set forth by the council. The Arts Commission has operated under these guidelines. They have not veered from any of those guidelines.
Maybe you need to change your guidelines.
They have followed each and every one of them. And so if we, as this body, that's the rule-setting body, wish to change some of those guidelines, make some little bit different rules, I am positive that the Arts Commission will follow those rules. So what I would like to ask is for members of council to get to Troy any adjustments, any differences that they would like to see in the Arts Commission. I'm going to do the same. I think everyone knows that I have a little bit of a difference of opinion on that. It's okay to have differences of opinion.
Oh, sure.
We have them all the time.
Absolutely.
We have them every day. We have them with our own family. And so I'm hoping that we can work through this situation.
Yeah, okay, whatever.
I'm surprised that they're surprised that the community would express opposition to a communist symbol being displayed by the city.
Yeah, I just got a question. What the heck is wrong with these people? Why would anybody, and later on that woman who was over the art exhibit or whatever, she got up and testified, I understand the historical things of communism and the Soviet Union. I'm not in the dark about that. Well, then why would you want to display that in the first place?
Right, she has to know. She said her specialty was in international relations, so she has to understand that the Bolshevik Revolution is when they started using art in the service of revolution. And so she wants to display that in her community.
Apparently
what that says to me is that she is displaying a sign that says, this is the way we're going.
Well, and you can't argue with that point if that's what the intent is.
You can't,
it does seem to be the way we're going. But
you can't also expect that people are not going to fight back.
Well, that's
because
the way
we've been fighting communists all over the world.
Yeah.
Supposedly, at least that's what we were told we were doing.
Yeah, that's what we were told. But yet this country here, our country right here, is increasingly looking more and more communistic, as we talk about all the time. And one example of that is Congress extends NSA call records collection powers to March. This is an article from TechCrunch, dated November 21st. In passing a short-term, while everybody's distracted on Capitol Hill with this dog and pony show, they do this. In passing a short-term funding bill to avoid a U.S. government shutdown, Congress has also extended the government's legal power, allowing it to collect daily millions of Americans' call records. Buried in a funding bill passed by the House this week was a clause that extended the government's so-called Section 215 powers, which allow the National Security Agency to compel phone providers to turn over daily logs known as metadata of their customers' logs, including their phone numbers when the call was made and the call's duration. The program is designed to allow intelligence analysts to sift through vast amounts of data to identify links between suspected terrorists. And who's a terrorist? Anybody is a suspected terrorist. You're a suspected terrorist. I'm a suspected terrorist. If you're an American, guess what? You're a suspected terrorist. You just didn't know it. But the program...
Well, if you believe in the sovereignty of our nation, in our U.S. Constitution, and that our government should be focused on our country, then you're a domestic terrorist.
Congratulations.
Because internationalists have taken over our government, and they've been internationalizing our government, ultimately for the purpose of creating a world federation.
Yes.
A system of world federalism.
So, if you want to know who's a terrorist, go to the website governamerica.com, and there's documents right there on the main page, which tells you what the MIAC report, the Missouri Information Analysis Center, which is a fusion center in Missouri. These documents came from, and they finger constitutionalists and people that believe. So this isn't conjecture, what Vicky's saying here. This is all documented in their own documents. So,
and isn't that insane? Honest to goodness, Americans are domestic enemies.
Yeah.
If you support our country as a country, then you're a terrorist.
Yeah, if you're a returning war
That's
veteran,
upside down,
you're a potential domestic terrorist. Yeah, these are things that they have said. We're not making this up. In the meantime, we see from American Institute for Economic Research, while you slept, government created internal passports and real ID. They say the deadline of yet another, and perhaps the most insidious element of the post-9/11 initiatives, a partial list of which includes the establishment of the Transportation Security Agency, the Department of Homeland Security, and a never-ending international war against nebulously defined non-corporeal enemy terror, is less than 1 year from coming to fruition. Beginning no later than October 1st, 2020, citizens of all U.S. states and territories will be required to have a real ID-compliant card or U.S. passport to board a commercial plane or enter a federal government facility. Pundits, citing the inevitability of what amounts to a national ID card, have regrettably been vindicated. To be sure, some states have resisted, but dependence upon federal aid and other programs administered from Washington, D.C. makes their ultimate surrender and compliance inevitable. Looking back, Social Security numbers and the cards bearing them broke ground for the path to the National Identification System. Thank you, FDR. For decades, they've been pointed reminders that the cards were intended to be account numbers and not integrated into Government Registry of American Citizens. Anyway, the article goes on from there. I just wanted to point out that the Real ID Act is right there, still being pushed, still being moved along, because we're being considered the enemy, because we're being considered terroristic.
Yeah, and when they started that was 1990, when George Herbert Walker Bush was president, and when they were deciding how they were going to cooperate with the Soviet Union. One of the things that I saw in that document 11, I'm really encouraging everybody to go read that document 11 at George Washington University. It'll be in the show notes, actually, so you can go click on it and see the areas of cooperation. Okay, one of the areas was international terrorism, and that was one of the earliest systems where our government established a global connection, a global system to fight terrorism. So all the while, we think we're dealing with our government on the ground, but technologically they have been building global systems, and that's really what the global governing system will be. It's global systems, and the icon of an octopus is perfect.
Yeah, and they've used that icon. Yeah.
Yeah, because you've got the head of it, and then the arms of it, reaching out to all the different countries. And actually maybe a squid is better, because a squid has a whole bunch of more tentacles. Mm-hmm. But
anyway,
that's the global system. System.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Anyway, in the waning moments of time, I wanted to get into real quickly here a little bit of this national security hearing that happened on the Senate the other day. This is FBI Director Christopher Wray. He's commenting on the activities, again, of the Communist Chinese.
On the counterintelligence front, where the Chinese government is now targeting our innovation through a wider than ever range of actors. Not just Chinese intelligence officers conducting both traditional and cyber espionage, but people they enlist to help them, like contract hackers, certain graduate students and researchers, insider threats within U.S. businesses, and a whole variety of other actors working on behalf of China. We see the Chinese government encouraging and even assisting the abuse of incentive plans like the so-called 1,000 Talents program, plans that offer cash and other enticements to bring American information back to China, information that is often actually trade secrets and other innovations stolen from American companies and universities. And we're seeing Chinese companies then using that stolen technology to compete against the very American companies it belongs to. We're seeing intellectual property and data theft from companies and academic institutions of just about every size in just about every sector. This is a threat to our economic security and in many respects a threat to our national security. It's also a threat to American jobs, American businesses, American consumers, and it's in small towns and big cities alike. Even as we speak, even as I sit here testifying before this committee, the FBI has around 1,000 investigations involving attempted theft of U.S.-based technology that lead back to China.
Isn't that incredible?
And that's involving nearly all of the FBI's 56 field offices, and I can tell you that number is representing a significant uptick from a few years ago, and it's growing.
1,000 investigations active going on right now at the FBI involving China and their theft of data. This is incredible.
Well, our government's economic policies for global trade enabled all of it, and you'll never get rid of it until you shut the door to the universities, because our government funds research programs at the universities, and the universities invite the world of students in to work on that research.
Yeah, and on the subject.
So things that you might not have considered to be spy-worthy stuff, technology, well, it's dual use. And if you get the basic design of it and you can replicate it, then you can improve it. And pretty soon you do have something that is high-tech and makes us vulnerable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so stupid. It's so stupid.
I agree. It's nothing short of treason and sedition. I mean, that's what's going on here.
And they
not
never recommend really fixing the problem.
Right.
The fix to the problem is always some superficial change, or maybe like this CIA agent. Well, chances are, whatever it was that he was doing it under the direction of the department.
Well, there's probably 10 more to take his place, at least. That's the problem.
About 10 or 11 years ago or so, when I was really following the H-1B issue very closely, the Pentagon was issuing some kind of a RFP, request for proposals, and getting comments on it. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions they asked in the comments is, do you think that foreigners would spy for their own countries or something like that? Or would you spy for your own country if you were working in a foreign country? I said, of course I would, because if my country wanted me to do that, I would. And who wouldn't? If there was a need, of course, I wouldn't be working in a country I don't think that my country wanted to spy on. But if they did and I was, I would. So
a lot of people wouldn't have the courage
issue was
to do that.
A Pentagon contract and classified materials, and if you bring in foreigners to work on those contracts, what do you expect,
Yeah. Well, that's the danger, and that's what the danger. I don't like this dual citizenship thing that they have going on. I think that's just absolutely crazy.
I do too.
You should have allegiance to one country.
And I think it's for the same reason, so that our country can be infiltrated legally.
Yeah. Now later on in the hearing, Ohio Senator Rob Portman discussed the Chinese activities regarding, again, in American universities, the Confucius Institutes. But I think we're going to have to leave it there for now in the interest of time, because we're just about out of time already. The 3 hours have already escaped us. So maybe we'll pick that up again next week, and as well as we have other things that we didn't get to as well. There's just never enough time in the show. But I think what we talked about, as always, is very important. We also have this push for a cashless society waiting in the wings. Japan, there's an article I have from Reuters about how they're trying to go cashless in Japan. The elderly are not in favor of it. But, the elderly are the elderly. They're not going to be here forever. And the younger generation takes over. And as Japan goes with their compliant population, so the U.S. and the rest of the world go as well. Very dangerous where we're headed there. But this is what we always talk about, with the term technocratic tyranny.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
So anyway, we'll let you go for this week, folks. Thanks for being with us. Pray for this republic. Do what you can to restore it. Join us back here next week as we'll just come loaded for bear again, won't we, Vicky?
Yep, always. Always ready for it.
All right. God bless you, folks. Thanks for being with us. And tell somebody about the broadcast and join us back here then. Thanks, Vicky.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, bye-bye.